Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Sinister Mask. The Isle of Wight had always been a place of beauty, with its rolling green hills and windswept cliffs overlooking the sea. But that night, beneath the pale autumn moon, it was the scene of something far more sinister. Holly Arnold stepped out of her carriage, the chill of the October wind biting at her skin as she approached the grand mansion that loomed ahead. The Ashgrove Manor was a relic of old-world wealth and decadence, an isolated estate perched on the edge of a craggy cliff. The sound of waves crashing violently below barely penetrated the thick fog that had rolled in, clinging to the island as if to obscure its dark secrets. It was a night of celebration, a lavish masquerade ball hosted by the mysterious Lord Drayton, who had recently taken residence at the manor. Holly had received her invitation only a week ago, delivered by a courier who said nothing as he handed her the parchment with its ornate black wax seal. Something about the invitation had intrigued her, and despite the whispers of the locals warning her to stay away, Holly couldn't resist. As she stepped inside the grand foyer, the eerie quiet of the mansion enveloped her. The walls were lined with portraits of stern, lifeless faces, their eyes seeming to follow her every move. She glanced around at the other guests, their elegant gowns and tuxedos shining beneath the soft candlelight. But it was their masks that stood out the most elaborate, handcrafted, and grotesque in their design. Some resembled twisted animals, others distorted faces with hollow eyes and sneering mouths. Holly wore a simple silver mask, delicate and understated, in contrast to the more macabre designs that surrounded her. She wasn't one for extravagance, but something about this night felt off from the start. The air was thick with tension, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. She moved through the crowd, searching for anyone she might recognize. The strange thing was, despite the number of people in the room, there was no idle chatter, no laughter. Just the soft shuffling of feet and the occasional clink of glass. A shiver ran down Holly's spine as she realized how unsettling the atmosphere had become. "But Miss Arnold?" A smooth voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see a man standing before her, tall and handsome in a mask that resembled a grinning skull. His eyes gleamed with a strange intensity behind it. "Oh yes," Holly replied. "Then you are Lord Drayton? I'm so glad you could join us tonight. It's not often we get such intriguing guests." Holly couldn't help but feel a prickling sense of unease at his words. "Oh, please enjoy yourself," he said. "The night has only just begun." As he walked away, something about the way he spoke, about the way he looked at her, sent a chill through her bones. She moved to the ballroom, where an orchestra played a haunting melody, the strings high and discordant. Guests twirled in synchronized circles, their movements stiff and unnatural. As she watched, Holly noticed something strange. Some of the dancers seemed to stumble, their feet hesitating as if they were struggling to control their own bodies. The air grew colder, and a strange hum seemed to vibrate from the walls. Holly clutched her arms, her breath coming in short, visible puffs. Then, without warning, the lights dimmed, plunging the room into near darkness. The music stopped. Holly froze, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The murmur of confused guests was suddenly silenced by a sound that chilled her to the core. One of the masked figures let out a piercing scream. Holly whipped her head toward the sound, her eyes searching the darkened room. A woman in a blood-red gown was collapsing to the floor, her mask slipping from her face. But something was wrong. The mask didn't just fall, it seemed to writhe, as though it was alive, pulsating with a grotesque energy. The woman clawed at her face, her screams turning guttural as the mask fused to her skin, its ornate edges digging deep into her flesh. Holly watched in horror as the woman's body convulsed, her limbs twisting in unnatural directions. And then, in an instant, she was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving only the mask behind. Panic erupted in the room, but before anyone could flee, the doors to the ballroom slammed shut with a deafening bang. Holly's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what she had just seen. The masks, they were alive. She stumbled backward, her breath quickening. The other guests, once poised and graceful, now jerked and twitched as though invisible strings controlled them. Masks began to warp and tighten around their faces, the once beautiful designs becoming monstrous. Holly could see it now. The masks weren't just hiding the guests' identities, they were trapping them. She darted toward the nearest exit, her fingers clawing at the heavy wooden doors. But they wouldn't budge. Frantic, she turned to look for another way out, her eyes catching a glimpse of Lord Drayden watching from the shadows, a sinister smile playing on his lips. Holly shouted. "What are you doing to them?" Lord Drayden stepped forward. "The masks are ancient relics, imbued with a life of their own. They demand a sacrifice, Miss Arnold, and tonight they've chosen you." She backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. "But why me? You came willingly," he said. "And now you must wear the mask." Holly turned to run, but something caught her wrist, a mask, cold and heavy. It was different from the others, more sinister, with jagged edges and hollow, gaping eyes. She tried to drop it, but her fingers wouldn't release their grip. The ballroom around her seemed to blur, the figures of the guests melting into the shadows, their faces lost behind the grotesque masks that now consumed them. Holly felt the cold metal of her own mask pressing against her skin, tighter and tighter, as though it was sinking into her very flesh. She screamed, struggling to pull it off, but it was too late. The mask had a mind of its own, and it wasn't letting go. Her vision darkened, her breath growing shallow as the mask fused to her face, its icy tendrils creeping into her mind. The last thing Holly saw before the world faded was Lord Drayden standing above her, his voice a whisper in her ear. "Welcome to the ball, Miss Arnold. You'll be staying with us forever." And then, days later, the mansion stood silent, its doors closed to the world once again. The guests, including Holly Arnold, were never seen again. Locals whispered about the cursed masquerade, warning others to stay far away from Ashgrove Manor. But every so often, on misty nights when the moon was full, they say you can still hear the faint strains of music drifting from the manor's windows, and if you're unlucky enough to peek inside, you might just catch a glimpse of the dancers' masks still clinging to their faces, forever trapped in the sinister waltz. The rumors spread like wildfire, creeping into the pubs and inns of the Isle of Wight. People whispered about the cursed masquerade, of those who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a haunted melody that echoed through the night. No one dared go near Ashgrove Manor, not after Holly Arnold and the others disappeared. The stories were enough to keep even the most curious away. But, like all legends, they eventually faded into the background. Years passed, and though the manor remained abandoned, the locals spoke of it less and less. It became just another forgotten relic of the island's dark history until, one fateful autumn evening, something stirred once again. The heavy fog rolled in earlier than usual the October night, blanketing the island in a thick, suffocating mist. The moon, barely visible through the clouds, cast an eerie glow over the landscape, making even the familiar streets of town feel foreign and dangerous. A young woman named Emily Pearson sat in her small cottage on the edge of town, staring at the letter that had arrived earlier that day. It was old, much older than it should have been, sealed with black wax. She couldn't explain why she hadn't thrown it away the moment she received it. Something about the envelope had drawn her in, much like it had drawn Holly all those years ago. Emily had heard the stories growing up, the ones about the masquerade ball and the guests who never returned. But the details were always hazy, wrapped in layers of exaggeration and myth. Now, as she turned the envelope over in her hands, her curiosity was piqued. She carefully broke the seal and unfolded the parchment inside. The handwriting was elegant, the ink dark and crisp, as if it had been written just yesterday. "You are cordially invited to a masquerade ball at Ashgrove Manor, October 31st, at the stroke of midnight. Formal attire and mask required." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Ashgrove Manor. No one had set foot in that place for years. She knew the stories, of course. Everyone did. But the pull of the letter was undeniable, as if it had been written just for her. She glanced out the window at the thickening fog, a sense of dread creeping over her. Every instinct told her to stay far away, to burn the letter and forget that ever existed. But curiosity gnawed at her, just as it had with Holly. By the time Halloween arrived, Emily had convinced herself that the stories were just that, stories. The rational part of her mind refused to believe that anything truly sinister lay in wait at the old mansion. It was likely just a prank, some bored teenagers trying to stir up trouble. Still, she found herself standing outside Ashgrove Manor just before midnight, dressed in a simple black gown and holding a delicate lace mask in her hand. The mansion looked the same as it had in the old photographs she'd seen, grand, imposing, and eerily lifeless. The fog curled around its tall, black iron gates, and for a moment Emily hesitated. But something, some unseen force, seemed to beckon her forward. As she stepped through the gates, the air grew colder, the night unnaturally still. The door to the manor swung open on its own, as if expecting her arrival. Emily took a deep breath and walked inside. The foyer was vast and dimly lit, much like the description Holly had once seen. Candles lined the walls, their flickering flames casting long shadows that danced eerily across the room. And there, standing at the far end of the hall, was a figure tall and slender, dressed in formal attire, his face obscured by a porcelain mask. "Welcome," the man said, his voice smooth and unsettling. "We've been waiting for you, Miss Pearson." Emily swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. Who are you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, revealing the ballroom beyond. The sight that greeted her made her stomach churn. Dozens of figures were already inside, all masked, all moving with the same unnatural grace. It was like stepping back in time, except something was terribly wrong. The masks. They were the same as in the stories, ornate, grotesque, and somehow alive. Emily could feel the malevolent energy radiating from them, twisting and writhing in the dim light. "Please," the man in the porcelain mask said, motioning toward the crowd. "Join the dance." Emily took a step back, panic rising in her throat. "No, I don't belong here." The man smiled beneath his mask, though the expression never reached his eyes. "Oh, but you do. The masks choose who they want, and tonight they've chosen you." Before Emily could react, the ballroom doors slammed shut behind her. She spun around, frantically pulling at the handle, but it was no use. She was trapped. The music started a haunting, discordant melody that seemed to crawl under her skin. The masked figures turned toward her in unison, their empty eyes boring into her. And then, without warning, the man in the porcelain mask was at her side, holding out a hand. "One dance," he said softly. "And then you'll understand." Emily shook her head, but her body betrayed her. Against her will, she found herself placing her hand in his, the coldness of his touch sending a shock through her system. He led her onto the dance floor, where the other masked figures parted to make room for her. As they began to waltz, Emily felt something strange, her limbs growing heavy, her movements stiff. It was as if the mask she wore was tightening around her face, melding with her skin. Panic surged within her, but she couldn't stop. The music, the rhythm, it consumed her. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in a large mirror at the end of the room. Her face, no, the mask was warping, distorting, just like the others. It twisted into a grotesque smile, its hollow eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. And then she saw them, the other dancers. Their masks weren't just masks. They were faces. Hollow, lifeless faces, their expressions frozen in terror beneath the elegant facade. And among them she recognized one Holly Arnold. Holly's mask, once delicate and silver, had become something monstrous, fusing with her skin, her eyes vacant and unseeing. But somehow, Emily knew she was still there, trapped, just as she now was. The realization hit Emily like a blow. There was no escape. The masks had claimed another victim. Weeks later, the townspeople once again whispered of Ashgrove Manor. Another young woman had vanished, just like Holly before her. The fog around the mansion grew thicker, its presence more foreboding. And on certain nights, when the wind blew just right, they could hear it again, the faint, haunting melody drifting on the breeze, the echoes of a masquerade ball that never ended. They say that if you listen closely, you can hear the footsteps of the dancers, the soft rustle of their gowns, and the whispers of those who wore the masks. But none who hear the music ever dare follow it, for they know that once you enter Ashgrove Manor, you don't leave. The masks won't let you. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.